Thank you for joining me today. My name is Steve Dodds, and today we'll be talking about a couple different things that have happened this month regarding the CFPB and the FTC, and then just a couple other questions I've gotten from our 20 Club members. These webinars are all brought to you by the Garage Composites Compliance Division. We do the research so that you don't have to. Our intent with these webinars is to make it easy for you guys to deal with compliance issues. There can be a lot of stuff going on out there, either stuff that you don't hear because you're not watching it, or sometimes it's just hard to tell from the noise everything that's going on, what's important. So with these webinars, we try to give you guys a real quick analysis of kind of where we're at, important things you need to watch. If you haven't seen any of the other webinars that we've done, please go back and watch. They're all archived on the channel. But here we go. So this week, I have two different things I want to talk about. So number one, I got some questions over the course of the last month that I want to make sure everybody knows the answers to, because if somebody asks them, it probably means there are more people out there that have the same question. And then I wanted to update you guys on some news, some things that have happened with the FTC, CFPB, that I think are important to know about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is who should manage your compliance programs and why. So I get this question a lot of times when we're trying to set up a compliance program, who should monitor it. There are a couple key things you want to make sure of. So number one, you want to make sure that this person, whoever is managing your compliance, is outside of the commission structure. The reason I say that is we don't ever want to create a conflict of interests. So the compliance manager may sometimes set policies that are not the most profitable way to do things. And the reason they're not the most profitable is because they're not legal to do it that way. We don't ever want to put an employee in a position where they have to make a decision how closely to follow a compliance piece because it's cutting into their pocketbook. So that's kind of number one right there. We want to make sure that whoever's in place has the authority over everyone in the dealership to hold them accountable to following the policies that are set. So they need to have authority over all of your managers, including your general manager, to make sure that these policies get put in place. This usually is someone that's like an HR person or a controller level person that only really reports to the owner, so that there's just keeping there from being any gray areas as to who they're supposed to be listening to, what compliance needs to be done. That's on their plate to decide what needs to be done and implement it. Number three, we want to make sure that person is a long-term and trusted employee. So we don't want that to be somebody like the finance manager who may leave next month, or may only be here for 6 months or a year, or sales manager, or even general manager, unless it is also the owner. So we want to make sure we think, okay, is this a long-term employee? Are they trusted? Because that is the person that you have to trust with basically your pocketbook. If you're an owner, they're supposed to keep you from getting in trouble and having to pay huge fines or deal with big lawsuits. The fourth thing I'm going to say, and no matter how trusted this employee is, always double check. So as the owner or whoever is on site as the top person, you always want to spot check, make sure that doors that are supposed to be locked, like doors for the where we store the non-public personal information, make sure that's locked at all times. Spot check that. Make sure that the checklists for the completed deals are being done, and things like I was just in a dealership where I did an audit, and half the driver's license copies were not able to be read because they were copied too dark. That is something that the compliance manager or whoever's checking the deals before they get stored should look at and go, oh, hold on a second. I can't read this. This is not a valid ID if I can't read it, right? So we want to make sure that there's somebody in place that says, stop, this is what needs to be done, it needs to be done correctly, and there needs to be somebody behind them to double check that. It's too easy for that to become a nuisance and for the person that's in charge just to rubber stamp stuff and let it go through. Over time, that becomes the norm, and then we end up in trouble. So no matter how trusted that person is, always make sure you double check behind them. So that's really who should be your compliance manager. It should be somebody, again, outside the commission structure, has the authority over all the managers in the dealership, long-term trust employee, and always double check behind them. If there are other questions, specifics about who should be your compliance manager, please feel free to leave those below in the comments, or you can feel free to email me also at steve@Garage Composites. The second thing I wanted to talk about real quick is incoming non-public personal information. So you'll have customers, and you probably have already, that will have no problem with taking a picture of their driver's license and texting it to you or emailing it to you. The problem is that once that is in your possession, that driver's license has non-public personal information on it. So when we talk about NPI, or non-public personal information, it's basically anything beyond name, address, phone number. So anything that's not found in a public database is considered to be NPI. Customer sends it to you. Now it's in your possession. If it's in your email and your email gets hacked and the information gets out, you are now responsible for that. Those are tens of thousands of dollars fines, if not more. If you have multiple pieces of information in there, odds are if one person emailed you a copy of their driver's license, you probably have more than one in there. So you're talking ultimately hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're not controlling it. So here's what we recommend. So if a customer ever emails you or texts you a piece of non-public personal information, you want to have in place a print and delete policy. So there should be something in your employee handbook that says, here's what we do if we get NPI through electronic measures or electronic messages. Basically, we print the information, we put the information in the file, and then we delete whatever we have that we got electronically, so that it decreases the chances that we could get hacked and that information could get out. So if you have email, delete the file and then go into your trash, make sure you delete it again. Now, as you probably know, just because it's quote deleted doesn't mean it doesn't exist on your computer somewhere, but it is exponentially harder to find if you've deleted the information off of there. So that would be the first thing, is make sure you have a print and delete policy in place for any kind of non-public personal information. The other question I got on that is, and there's some banks that have secure portals where you can send information over to the bank, non-public personal information you've collected, like let's say for funding purposes. So you log into the portal, you send the information over to the bank takes care of it on their end, they fund you. That is something that if you're a bank and you have a set number of clients you're dealing with, that's a pretty sensible thing to do. From a dealership standpoint, though, that becomes much more difficult because we're dealing with the general public. And in order for one of those databases to work correctly, you basically have to give the customer a login. They have to log into the portal. They would basically drop the information in there where you could log in to the same secure database and retrieve it. So managing that secure portal becomes, frankly, a nightmare, something you don't really want to mess with. So as far as that, if you had that question, the secure portal piece, that's not really something we see from the dealership side. The other thing that you want to kind of keep in mind is anytime you have information stored electronically, it is so much easier for somebody to get a hold of it than if it's printed and in a locked file cabinet. So hackers work all the time on trying to break encryption and get into, email. I think everybody's email has been hacked at some point in time by now. But it's a whole lot harder for them to get to it if it's locked down physically in your dealership. So we really want to always tend toward that as a way to keep the non-public personal information secure, instead of doing it through some sort of technology just for security purposes. And really, ultimately, it doesn't matter how you do it. If the information gets out, it got out, and there are fines associated with it. If you heard about the Facebook fines that were just levied, what was it, $5 billion, I think, billion over letting out people's non-public personal information. That's basically what it came down to, is they weren't securing people's non-public personal information correctly. So that really, the email and text thing, really boil it down to print and delete policy. That's what you want to have in place. Employee handbook. So there, hopefully, well, I know every dealership out there does not have an employee handbook. If you don't have an employee handbook, we do have templates available through the Powersports Dealership Compliance Certification Program. That's part of the whole certification, the online certification that we provide. Is we do have templates for handbooks, and we have specific pieces that need to be in there. So these are some of the most common forgotten sections in your employee handbook. So you want to have information about how we handle the IRS Form 8300 reporting. So basically, if an employee takes $10,000, well, more than $10,000 in cash, what do we do to report it? That's where the 8300 form comes in. You should have a non-public personal information policy. So that's basically, that states when we collect non-public information, what do we do with it? Part of that would be the delete or print and delete policy. You should name a compliance manager in your employee handbook. If you get incoming requests for employee references, previous employee references, how do we handle that? Social media conduct, that's something that dealerships don't necessarily think about until something happens. Because there are so many different sections that need to be in there. The best thing you can do, if you don't already have one, again, I have templates available within Powersports Dealership Compliance Certification. So if you have questions about that, feel free to contact me or leave comments below. Again, steve@garagecomposites.com is my email address. Okay, so now let's move on to some news. So the first thing I'm going to talk about real quick is this settlement that LifeLock came to with the FTC. So basically what happened, LifeLock, which if you're not familiar with them, they're a company that basically was out there. You could pay them like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 bucks a month. And they would monitor your credit. If there were any changes to your credit or it looked like there was a suspicious activity, they would alert you, let you know, so that you could make sure that your information isn't used without your permission to buy things like cars or houses or open credit cards. So they agreed to pay $100 million in a settlement. And basically, here's what it comes down to. The FTC alleges, and the reason we use the word alleges is because it didn't go to court. They weren't found guilty, but they allege that FTC failed to establish and maintain a comprehensive, and you're going to hear this term, information security program to protect the user's sensitive personal information. Basically, what it means is they didn't have a policy in place to protect the customer's non-public personal information. In the compliance certification program, I refer to that as a non-public personal information policy. That is a policy that every organization that collects non-public information is supposed to have, that lays out what you do with the non-public information. It's supposed to have, as you see down here below, how MPI is collected, how it's stored, and how it's protected from any kind of breach. So those pieces right there should be the core of your program. But if you don't already have it, there is already stuff out there. I know I talked to 5 dealers over the last round of 20 clubs that have already had audits from their state looking for this policy. And this is something that until maybe 6 months ago wasn't a huge deal. Everybody was supposed to have it, but government organizations weren't going around and auditing whether dealers had it or not. So this is something you want to get in place if you don't already have it. Again, there's more information in the compliance certification program if you need it. If you don't, or if you have any questions, please just leave them in the comments below. But the FTC, basically LifeLock already paid $100 million in a settlement, and there are other companies out there that have already had to pay settlements also. And then the last 2 items really deal with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So there was a directorship change earlier this year. Basically, Mick Mulvaney was the director, and then Kathleen Kraninger. I always mess that. I think that's right. Kraninger basically was put into the permanent directorship. And on October 16th, there was the House Financial Services Committee basically filed a report, 333 pages. And basically what they said about how the financial organizations are being run and the CFPB is monitoring that stuff. Basically what they said is that there was a serious decline in actions under Mick Mulvaney, which we kind of already knew because he had said that he was not going to allow them to levy any fines or do anything to basically hold the banks accountable to following the rules that were laid out. And basically what Kraninger said is she indicated that basically she's going to crank things back up. And at this point, she's just warming up. So that's something I think that we need to definitely pay attention to is kind of what the CFPB is doing now, how things are changing there. In the fiscal year 2019, the reason I say fiscal years, it doesn't run in accordance with the calendar year. It's I think October through September for the federal government, for the CFPB. So basically they had 22 public enforcement actions that 6 of those were from previously filed lawsuits that were filed under Mick Mulvaney that she pulled back out and dealt with. There have already, this past fiscal year, there were $777 million in consumer relief that was released from fines that were levied. And then nearly $186 million in civil penalties. After making the announcement about the fines that had been levied, she went on to say, "I note these figures not as a measure of accomplishment, but to underscore the fact that the Bureau continues to appropriately utilize its enforcement tool." So that enforcement tool, of course, that she's talking about is the one that Mick Mulvaney said they're not going to use, which is the fines. So under Mick Mulvaney, they had stopped levying any fines. They're basically, the CFPB is going to start using that tool again to hold banks accountable. So the big reason that I point that out is there's definitely a shift. Now, I don't know that it's going to be as aggressive under the previous administration as it is now, but the Bureau's out there, they're paying attention. The action we've actually seen more commonly is these small state-run CFPB type organizations that have sprouted up after Mick Mulvaney took power over the CFPB, and those are the ones that are doing a lot of the enforcement on the ground. So heads up, CFPB, the federal organization, is back in action, and also these local CFPB type organizations have popped up on the state level. So the last thing I want to let you guys know about is that the CFPB is in the process of forming a new task force. They basically took applications for organizations, people that wanted to be involved with the new task force through October 25th. So was that 5 days ago? They closed the application process. The new task force basically is being created so that they can examine the existing legal framework that banks operate within, basically see what's working, what's not working, and then try to, as they put it, it's supposed to be harmonizing and modernizing consumer financial laws. So a good example of that would be, we talk about non-public personal information, and the definition of that is if it's available in a public database. Well, technically, cell phones and email addresses are not in a public database. Therefore, by definition, it should be non-public information. But we all treat it like public information because that is, I'm sure, the way it was intended when the law was written, but there weren't cell phones and there weren't email addresses. So things like that, they'll be modernizing a lot of the regulations and seeing what needs to be updated. Yet to be seen how aggressive or exactly where they'll go with this. The task force is specifically reporting directly to the director, and she will then decide what to do with those recommendations, changes, all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of a watch and see situation at this point. Well, this concludes another video from Garage Composites Compliance Division. We do the research so you don't have to. If you like what you saw here today and you're interested in getting certified, you can go to the description below and you'll see a link to the online certification. Also, if you are not already subscribed, please click subscribe and you will get notified whenever I host new videos. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't be shy. Go ahead and put those in the comments section below. I will answer any questions I see there. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.